In the aquarium hobby, we all make mistakes no matter what, but some of these mistakes are so common and so simple to avoid that they end up causing way more damage than they ever should. Today I'll be sharing with you 11 fish keeping mistakes that I see over and over again, and by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to avoid the most common mistakes in the hobby and set yourself up for long-term success. The first thing every fish keeper should know is to never feed spoiled fish food. I see so many people making the mistake of not keeping fish food properly, and over time it loses nutrients and starts breaking down before you even realize. The most common mistake is forgetting to seal the containers after feeding, especially flake foods. If you expose them to air, the flakes are going to rot and decay a lot quicker. But worse than that, bugs and parasites can lay their eggs in the food, and then those get transferred into your tank when you're feeding. This could be some sort of internal parasites, like for example, a fly could lay eggs on the flakes that your fish consume, and then they get sick. So just super important to seal any food whenever you're not feeding. It's going to prevent so much unnecessary trouble that you don't ever need. Another common mistake that spoils fish food is contacting food using wet hands. Basically, if you're cleaning the tank or you just have wet hands, do not ever put your wet hands in the fish food, or else all that food is going to be spoiled just like that. Water is going to cause mold to grow on the flakes and just ruin the whole thing. Keeping food properly stored is crucial for ensuring your fish are healthy because what you're feeding them directly affects their well-being. The next thing is one of the most common misconceptions in fish keeping, which is the fact that topping off aquarium water doesn't do anything to clean the tank. In fact, it gives you the illusion that you're doing something when you're really not doing anything at all. The only thing you're doing when you top off water is replacing water that was lost during evaporation. But all the concentrated minerals, ammonia, and nitrates remain in the water because they don't disappear when water evaporates, so the tank just becomes more concentrated. The only thing that leaves is the pure water itself, but nothing in it. So if you want to actually clean the water, you have to do water changes. I did not know about this for the longest time, nobody ever told me, and I'm not saying you can't ever replace any of the water by topping them off. It just doesn't remove any ammonia or nitrate or buildup, and so you shouldn't think of it as a form of maintenance. So yes, in order to maintain your tank, you cannot escape water changes. The third thing you should know is to never blindly trust advice from pet stores. Many aquarium stores, and I'm not saying all, but a lot of aquarium stores are trying to sell you as much as they possibly can. They're going to recommend materials that you don't need, equipment that you don't need, and even inaccurate information about stuff on the aquarium hobby because a lot of employees are just not trained. For example, many people can't tell the difference between a cardinal tetra and a neon tetra, or a ghost shrimp and a mono shrimp. Many stores don't have staff who are very knowledgeable about the aquarium hobby, and if the only advice you get is from them, it's not uncommon that you'll find misleading information that's not going to help you at all. You should instead take info from a variety of different sources. Normally I find smaller fish stores to be better with this. They tend to have staff that is more knowledgeable and more aware. Many beginners have no idea where to start, so they just ask a local fish store employee, and what they're told becomes everything that they know. It's so important to do your own independent research, which I cannot emphasize enough, and you are doing that right now by watching this video. So if you could give this video a like, that would definitely help a lot. The fourth mistake is buying sick fish, and this is definitely something I wish somebody had taught me to identify way earlier. The problem is that fish in pet stores aren't always in their best condition, and they could even carry diseases that spread once they're introduced to your tank. There's a couple important things to identify unhealthy fish, and I have to admit it does take some level of experience, but I'll try to make it as simple as I can. First off, avoid any fish that look unusually skinny. Those can indicate signs of a wasting disease, internal parasites. Also avoid getting fish that have any abnormality with their fins, any visible signs of fin rot, irregular swimming, erratic behaviors. Also see if they're being active in general, unless it's like a pleco or something that doesn't move a lot. Another very crucial thing when you're looking at fish at the store is to check if other fish in the tank look healthy, because oftentimes a fish can appear to be okay because it hasn't shown any symptoms of a disease yet, even though the rest of the tank is sick. But if you see that other fish are infected, there's a good chance that illness has already spread. So if even the fish you're looking at seems to be okay, if everybody else looks off, I would not choose any fish from that tank. This is definitely harder when it comes to online shopping because you can't assess the quality of fish you're getting. The thing you can make sure though is the source where you're getting it from. Obviously, you should try to purchase from a high-rated seller, but if possible, find a breeder that doesn't sell highly imported stuff, because those guys usually raise fish in their own fish rooms, and usually the stuff they sell aren't going to be mass-produced. If you are buying at a physical location, definitely inspect carefully at what you're getting to minimize any risk of getting sick fish or shrimp, because trust me, there's nothing worse than taking them home and then realizing they're infected. Another common mistake people make is overfeeding, and a lot of people don't even realize this. This is probably, next to not cycling an aquarium, probably the biggest reason why fish die, maybe even bigger than that. Most fish only need to be fed once or twice a day, or probably even once every 2 days, and so many people are just feeding way more than what they need. Overfeeding can also cause poor water quality. It's going to increase algae growth due to the excess nutrients. Ammonia levels are going to rise, and your tank is not going to stay balanced. The thing is, most people are aware of not to overfeed. Everybody says it, everybody emphasizes it, and yet everybody makes the mistake at some point. Even I did when I first started keeping goldfish in a bowl. You should never feed more than what your fish can eat in about a minute or even 30 seconds. If you're feeding something like an algae wafer or a big piece of fruit, make sure to take it out if they don't finish it, or else that thing's just going to ruin the water. Basically, take out anything that your fish can't consume in 2 minutes at most. Fish aren't really going to die if you underfeed, but they're definitely going to die if you overfeed. The sixth thing you should know is to not overclean your tank. This includes stuff like gravel vacuuming too often, cleaning your filter too often, and doing more water changes than what is necessary. My best advice is to always change as little as you can. At the end of the day, you have to realize that your aquarium is a natural ecosystem, and for a natural ecosystem to stay balanced and healthy, they need to be given space to grow and develop with little interference. Doing something like a 25% water change a week is totally fine, but anything more than like 30% a week is really just overdoing it. Now, I know there are certain circumstances where you have to do more than necessary, but for the most part, you should not be doing more water changes than 25% a week. There are stuff in the water that needs to stay in the water, and you shouldn't be taking everything out every time you do a water change. If you do, say, an 80% water change, it's going to completely shift the parameters, and your fish aren't going to be used to the new water that you add back in. Another common mistake is people are going to overclean their filters. Your aquarium filter is supposed to be a place where beneficial bacteria can sort of settle in and provide this place for beneficial bacteria to grow because of the surface area that your filter provides. Now, when you're cleaning your filter, say every time you do a water change, essentially what you're doing is you're destroying all the beneficial bacteria that's colonized, and that's going to cause stress or even kill fish from ammonia spikes. And when I say rinsed out, I do not mean rinsing it under clean tap water. That's something you should never do because that just completely wipes out all the good stuff in the filter. When you do rinse your filter media, you should only rinse it under existing tank water, not any clean tap water. These beneficial bacteria play a key role in turning toxic ammonia into nitrites, and then to nitrates, which keep your fish safe and your tank stable. It is the number one important part for the nitrogen cycle. Number 7 is one of the most common reasons why fish die, and that is adding fish in either before the tank is ready or before the fish is ready. Let's start with adding fish before your tank's ready. So many beginners skip or rush the process of cycling their tanks before they add stuff in. To put it simple, the reason why we need to cycle tanks is so that the ecosystem we create is biologically safe for any livestock we put inside. A common misconception here is a lot of people are going to think that beneficial bacteria exists in the water, but this is actually untrue because beneficial bacteria only survives on surfaces such as rocks, driftwood, gravel, plants. There's many ways you can establish this bacteria colony to get your tank going. There's even products out there that help you start the cycle with liquid bacteria. The best way to cycle your tank to establish this beneficial bacteria is to use stuff from other tanks. This could be driftwood, rocks, filter media from a different tank. Those things can introduce fully established bacteria and cycle tanks much faster and efficiently. It's a great idea to put a lot of these in the new tank to start that cycle off. What these bacteria will do is they're going to process toxic waste and turn these into the less dangerous nitrates. Oftentimes, once you see that a tank is cycled, water is going to clear up, and there may even be some algae growth here and there. The reason why we need beneficial bacteria is because without it, the fish waste that produces ammonia is going to directly harm the fish's health. But with these nitrifying bacteria, we're able to break those ammonia compounds down and turn them into nitrites and finally to nitrates, which are far less harmful. That could then be managed by keeping aquarium plants and doing water changes. The other part to this, adding fish before the fish are ready, is when you don't acclimate properly. A lot of people think all you need to do is float the bag in the water and just simply let them in after a few minutes. Even though that may be acceptable for hardier species like guppies, for a lot of fish, you have to gradually allow the tank water to match the water in the bag and do it slowly over a period of 30 minutes to an hour. For even more sensitive species and for most kinds of shrimp, you need to use the drip acclimation method where they're literally being drip adjusted to their new environment. What you should definitely never do is dump all the fish directly in. Most fish just require basic acclimation where you float the bag in the water and you slowly let water in. The 7th thing you should know about is light. Lighting is one of the most important things for any planted tank. Lighting can be the difference on whether you have a successful planted aquarium or one that fails. You can mess up fertilizers, substrates, but if your lighting is solid, you're still going to be able to see some progress. But if everything else is right and your lighting is wrong, nothing is going to work, period. But first of all, if you haven't already, make sure to actually spend the money and get yourself a full spectrum LED light, which is optimal not just for plant growth, but also for the fish and tank, as it contains colors like red, blue, and green. But the most important thing for any planted tank light is to find the right amount of light and the right intensity. In other words, make sure you provide suitable lighting for your tank. This pretty much entirely depends on the type of plants you're keeping. If you have low light plants, you want lower intensity lighting with shorter durations, and if they're high light plants, you want to provide higher lighting. The key is that you want to make sure that the lighting you provide is the right amount for your specific tank. If the light's too weak for the plants you have, they're not going to be able to grow. While if it's too strong for them, plants cannot use everything and the excess lighting goes on to feed algae growth. And that traps you in a cycle where your plants get slowly outcompeted by the faster growing algae. I like to keep planted tank lights on for about 7 to 9 hours a day. Matching the light to your specific setup is critical, and the easiest way to do that is to look at the plants you're keeping and find out what they need. And you don't have to get one of those fancy, expensive lights for the best results. You can easily find a full spectrum planted tank light on Amazon for about $15 to $25 that works just fine. I'll leave links in the description for the ones that I recommend. Something else to consider is the depth of your tank. If you have a tank that is really oddly shaped, for example if it's unusually tall, you need to check whether your light is going to be bright enough to reach the bottom. It's also important you provide consistent lighting every day. For that, I would 100% recommend getting a timer. You can buy them for like $5, and these things just turn the lights on and off on a regular schedule and provide the same amount of lighting consistently. Don't just turn it on whenever you have time or whenever you feel like it. It's not good for your tank in the long run, and most definitely not for any plants. The next thing is to avoid contacting aquarium water if you have an injury. I thought this was something that was obvious, but it's actually overlooked quite a lot. If you have a very minor scratch or a hangnail, that's usually fine, but if you have a deep cut somewhere, whether it be on your hand or arm, please don't expose it to water in any way. There exists a lot of bacteria in your aquariums that you just can't see, that can really cause serious infections if they somehow contact your wound. These bacteria in your tank are typically fine, they're not inherently dangerous per se. However, if you have an open injury, then that's a totally different story. And that brings me to another point, which is to always wash your hands and arms after doing something with tank water. Even if you don't have any obvious cuts or injuries, it's always a good idea and a good practice to clean yourself afterwards, just because your aquarium water naturally contains bacteria that you don't want residing on your skin. And sometimes you might even have a cut somewhere that you didn't realize. It's just basic hygiene to wash your hands after touching aquarium water, but more importantly, avoid aquarium water entirely if you have an injury. Decorations are something so many fish keepers focus on. The biggest problem though is people assume everything is safe. Fish all require a natural habitat, and your aquarium should somewhat emulate their environment in nature to provide a good setting. Things like fake plastic plants and pink gravel are not recommended because they create this unnatural and artificial environment that can really stress out the fish, because to them it doesn't feel safe or familiar, and it just isn't realistic. Not only are these fake plants, fake decor unnatural, but they could also be very unsafe. Many plastic decorations have these sharp edges and these just irregular shapes that can trap or hurt your fish, and I've seen this myself when I first got into the hobby. A lot of these decorations can also release chemicals into the water due to their colors, and these chemicals could just slowly seep out over time. And I'm not saying to go against decorations entirely, like I have this cave in my 20 gallon that's a really nice hiding spot. Well, not really a hiding spot, nobody really goes in there, but it's pretty nice to have, and it's aquarium safe. My point is that you should be careful when you're choosing decorations. Make sure it doesn't have a bunch of weird coloring, make sure it's aquarium safe, and choose something that's not going to be too out of shape. This applies actually not just to decorations, but also to stuff like botanicals or leaf litter that you find outside. A lot of people like to go outside and find their own leaf litter, driftwood, stuff like that. The problem is that a lot of times these things you find outside could have chemicals on them, like you might bring in a leaf from the side of a road or somewhere, or a polluted area. It could possibly poison your fish in your tank. Either way, you want to make sure to get your decorations, your botanicals from a good source. I think it's safe to say that most, if not all, aquarists hate seeing algae take over their tank. And many fish keepers, myself included, have spent a ton of time figuring out what causes algae and trying different things to get them removed. But it's extremely important to understand algae before you control it. To put it simply, algae is caused by imbalances from too much light and excess organic waste in the water column. And although it is a legitimate concern, one thing that's important to recognize is that algae is not always harmful to your tank. In fact, in most cases, having some algae is even beneficial. Algae is simply a natural process that occurs in nature, and that includes your aquariums. Pretty much as long as there's some light and water, there's going to be algae. It's just something that's always going to be present in your fish tanks. Small amounts of algae can also provide a source of food. Whether you realize it or not, fish, shrimp, and snails all like to snack on some algae growth here and there, and algae provides an amazing food source for many smaller creatures, unless it's like blackbeard algae or staghorn algae or some type of algae that's problematic. But perhaps the most important thing algae does is act as a warning system for you as the fish keeper whenever there's any imbalance in the tank. Algae is a great indicator that tells you when something in your tank is off, so whenever you see algae growing faster than usual, it could indicate too much light, overfeeding, too much waste, or a lack of water changes. Algae growth itself is not a problem, but rather a symptom, and once you understand what's causing algae, it becomes a lot easier to manage. The issues mainly arise when algae growth becomes uncontrolled, where it grows beyond what is healthy. Controlling algae ultimately boils down to managing the basics, such as limiting the amount of light, as well as controlling nutrient buildup with water changes. But I would say keeping aquarium plants, especially floaters and the fast-growing plants, and having a lot of them, are really going to purify the water to get rid of that algae, because plants are able to take out a ton of excess waste in the tank. They'll be competing with algae for nutrients, and you'll have a much easier time managing your aquariums. But just to be clear, if your tank is sparsely planted, or if you only have 2 or 3 plants here and there, that's probably not going to help as much, and it's totally different than having a heavily planted tank. Plants are also super healthy for the fish. They make your tanks a lot more natural and just keeps everything healthy. It's also helpful to have algae eaters like Amano shrimp or bristlenose plecos as a means of control. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more videos just like these, make sure to subscribe down below. If you want to know my top 12 best aquarium cleanup crew, click the video on screen.